So we are so thrilled to bring this next guest to the Rail Talk studio. She is the excellent horse racing host and reporter at NBC Sports. She also does hosting and reporting for Prime Video. Britney Eurton, welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you for having me. This is such an honor, and what an intro. You're kicking off my week in a good way.
Yeah, hell yeah. No, we're stoked to have you. You obviously you do great work, and I want to ask you a little bit about your reporting side as well, but I would love to start by talking about the Preakness. I saw you at the Preakness draw last night. You did a great job drumming up interest because I think the initial I'm interested, but I'm saying I think the initial reaction from people when the Derby winner doesn't go is like, oh, snooze, ho-hum, who really cares about this race? But it's a really good field and has a lot of history about it. You know, what are some of the storylines you're looking forward to most this weekend?
I mean, I agree with what you say there. And initially, a lot of people are like, well, what is the Preakness then if you don't have the Kentucky Derby winner? I'm like, well, it's an American Classic. It's a really prestigious race. There's $2 million on the line. It's in Baltimore, which is I personally really enjoy coming here. The whole week is a lot of fun. I was talking about it yesterday at the draw to drum up interest. As you say, the Alibi Breakfast is great. For me, covering the Preakness is completely different as well. The energy, everybody is so much more relaxed. There's a lot of tension surrounding the Kentucky Derby, naturally. But being here in Baltimore, at Pimlico, I mean, in the final time, we're going to see it in this state. I don't know. For me, I just love it regardless. So there might not be sovereignty here, but hey, thanks for journalism and Sandman. You got a lot to talk about. And there's a lot of new horses in the race that make it interesting, and they're all trying to take down the Derby runners. So for me, it's easy to drum up excitement.
And Brittany, I appreciate you saying that, because the only reason why we're running Sandman is just to give you another story.
I appreciate that. I actually went up to Terry Finley yesterday and I said, thank you for running Sandman.
We're team players. We knew you were going to be on the show. So we're like, hell, we might as well at least run the horse just in case. But all right, now you're handicapping this race. Obviously a lot of speed in here. Is there something that intrigues you where you're like, hey, this is something that's a little bit different than the running style that I maybe anticipated in the Derby? Or is it, hey, there's so much speed in here, it's going to, set up for closers? How are you handicapping this race?
I think Pimlico is a really interesting track. I think if you're more tactical, it definitely behooves you. Of course, we're going 1 mile and 3/16 in comparison to the 1 1/4 miles, but I tend to like the horses that are more forwardly placed, right? That being said, Bob Baffert didn't seem too disturbed by the fact that he got the rail again, which I'm told is 180 to 1 for one trainer with two different horses. And then Mark Cassidy came back and said, well, I did it with the same horse in War of Will. So perhaps not the worst thing, but for them to be running a horse in its third star off of an allowance victory, drawing the rail, I don't know. They must have this horse held in very high regard. So I'm intrigued with that one. And we know how good Flavien Prat is. I think journalism is going to be a lot closer depending upon the break. So for me, I like the horses that are more forwardly placed. I don't see this entirely being such a hot pace that it's going to completely, disband up top. Though I know for Sandman's connections, you're going to want to see it go that way.
Yeah. No, we love that. I also would like to see him a little bit closer to like journalism. Like he did show speed in his first couple of starts, and I think Johnny Velasquez is a really good tactical speed rider. So I'd like to see him in with a chance on the far turn. I want to shift gears just a second because I gave you credit on the show a little while ago when you had your interview with Belinda Stronach. Right. It was at the Pegasus World Cup, and a lot of interviewers I thought would have asked a bunch of fluff questions there, but you asked pretty hard questions about the future of Gulfstream Park and the future of Santa Anita. Obviously, the future of Florida racing looks a little better, I think, now, thanks to John and the TRI and a lot of people lobbying to kill that decoupling bill. You're a California horsewoman. Like, what are your thoughts right now about the present and future of California racing?
I always try to be an optimist, right? But sometimes you have to be a realist as well. And it's been challenging to see the direction in which California is going. And I think a lot of it has to do that we don't have supplemental wagering. You could look at California and say, hey, look at how long it's been sticking around without any additional purses, where you look at every other jurisdiction, Kentucky, obviously New York, you look at Oaklawn Park in Arkansas, and just the supplemental wagering that they have. So the fact that we still have great racing at Santa Anita, granted, I know we don't have the field sizes we need. I know that we don't have the purses that are going to attract more horses and owners to run out there. But the fact that it's still going, and then now, based off of what we've seen, they have increased attendance and wagering, it does give me some hope. I can't say that I'm not saddened to see the tracks that have closed. I had a conversation just the other day with a bloodstock agent. We were talking about the loss of Hollywood Park and how I don't believe anybody at the time realized what Hollywood Park meant to the circuit of California, because it's venue overload, right? You don't want to stay at one venue for too long. One, because I think people naturally get bored. Two, because can a track really take on that many horses, workouts, races for months at a time? You need to shift where you're going. Also, you're talking about temperature. It's really hot in Arcadia, California when you get into June, July, before you head down to Del Mar. So Hollywood Park was such an integral part of the racing circuit in Southern California that when we didn't have that anymore, I think it really shook everything up. Obviously, Golden Gate, it's one of the first tracks outside of Santa Anita and Del Mar that I went to. So it was a very special place for me. So there's a lot of sadness that goes into what I see in California. It's no secret that my dad has a stable in Kentucky. And if I'm being quite honest, that was a very hard transition for me to accept. But I support my father and him wanting to, go for more opportunity. I probably didn't answer your question. That was probably a fluff answer, but I'm saddened, but I have to remain hopeful because it's home. I will do whatever I can, and I don't think that that's much, but to help keep racing in Southern California alive, because it means so much to me.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a very fair answer, especially being, a native of California. I mean, it's going to be near and dear to you. And you see it more than we do here on the East Coast as far as what the different tracks mean, what it means for the horses and what the circuit does. So we appreciate that insight. I'm going to ask you another insight question, and there's no wrong answer to it. And that is, we've been hearing a lot of debate about elongating the Triple Crown window. So instead of it being 5 weeks, it's going to be 8 weeks. Maybe you flip flop, the Belmont and the Preakness. What's your feeling on it? Not only as a horse person, but also as spokesperson for the masses.
It's funny. I was like, well, with this conversation coming up again, I probably have to have a firm opinion where I stand with this, because for so long I've heard both sides, and I still to this day understand where each are coming from in terms of keeping it the same versus changing it. For me, I think it could be a little bit of both. I'd like to think that I am a bit of a traditionalist. So there is something about the challenge of the Triple Crown, the order in which it's in, the fact that you end with the Belmont going a mile and a half. It's the true test of a champion, that I would like to keep the same, right? But my colleague Randy Moss probably said it best. The tradition lies in the challenge, and the challenge comes from the competition. Now, you want the best horses to face off against each other. If trainers are taking a different approach now than they did 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, whatever it might be, that they want to give their horses more time, then perhaps the timing of the races should change to accommodate that. Mm-hmm. But what I do love is Derby, Preakness, Belmont. That's where the tradition in me lies, with the distances as well, because that's part of what makes it special.
For sure. And I just want to ask a quick follow-up on that as someone who is involved in the production and the broadcasting of these events. I think one of the arguments that we hear for not elongating the Triple Crown is that, well, people lose interest. And I personally think, like, if you do it every 4 weeks, it's the difference between 8 weeks and 5 weeks. Is that really that much of a difference? Have you heard anything, or have you seen anything to suggest that stretching these races out would diminish the public's interest?
If you were to ask somebody on the street how many weeks there are between the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont, they would have absolutely no idea. They may even say to you, what's the Preakness and what's the Belmont? And that's what's unfortunate. Most people have no idea what the Triple Crown is. It's a reality that those in horse racing need to understand. They know what the Kentucky Derby is. They may not watch it, though it seems like 21.1 million people did this year, which is great. Yeah. But I think where it begins is just educating people that there's more than just one race throughout the year. I mean, we've got incredible racing. We've got the Breeders' Cup, whatnot, but it starts with the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and then the Belmont. I don't think people will have any idea how much time is in between. Those in horse racing do. Outside of it, no.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Good point.
And with that in mind, let's pivot to the Breeders' Cup then. You know, they've expanded it, the number of races. They've expanded the number of divisions that are being represented.
Mm-hmm.
They've made it now where it's a 2-day event, you know, with the Freshman Friday and then, you know, the older horses running on Saturday. Can you see that continuing to evolve and expand? Or is it these 14 races are kind of where we should be maxed out in?
That's a great question. I think you get such great crowds and excitement surrounding the Breeders' Cup for the 2 days that I love that you get that, right? But you also don't want to make it so big that any horse can run in any race, right? What makes the Breeders' Cup special is you truly do have the best of the best from around the world facing off against each other. Is 14 too many? I haven't given it that much thought. I probably need to really zero in on what races you need and what you don't need. But for me, I think I've really had to come to terms with, because as I said, a bit of a traditionalist, that for this sport to grow, you have to grow with the times, and that might mean some tough changes.
Right.
But
and what about decoupling? I'm sorry, I'm using that term, but what about decoupling?
I was like, are we going back to Florida?
Exactly. No, please. Having the older horses, you know, keep the more traditional role and moving the 2-year-old races to December. That was one of the things that Mike Rapoli actually brought up on the show a couple of weeks ago, as well as maybe you split it up into making it a 2 different weekend event. Is that something that NBC would relish, or they'd be like, nope, we like it because we have this contract and that's the way we should move forward with it?
That's definitely above my pay grade. I would.
Fair answer.
I don't know what's on their slate come that time of year, but I think that having the 2 days back to back is great. It builds that excitement for horsemen and horsewomen, is something to point towards. So if you're then having to adjust your mindset, which they do every day, I should give them a lot more credit than that, to pointing your 2-year-olds towards December, it just feels like it's a different event. Maybe it wouldn't be the Breeders' Cup. Maybe they call it something different. I've always loved Future Stars Friday because you're putting the highlight on these young horses, and it definitely behooves the horses that are more mature early that maybe cannot make it when they're 3, because we know how many horses don't really progress from 2 to 3 the same way. So that's one that I'd have to think about. But again, if we have to change to get more people into the sport and it's for the betterment of the horses, then why not?
Well, that's a great segue into my next question, because, you know, we talked about this last week on the show. We've seen kind of the Griffin Johnson effect with Sandman, where he's bringing a lot of young people into the game, and like, sure, he's rubbing some people the wrong way at some point, but like, go ahead, tell me your thoughts. Like, I'd love to hear what you think.
I can't handle horse racing Twitter sometimes.
Yeah, it's the worst. The worst.
I don't understand the whole premise behind it. I truly cannot wrap my head around why we would not embrace anybody new in this sport that genuinely seems to like it. That someone's really going to have to talk me through that one, because it makes no sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, you can't complain that there's no young people in the business and then also gatekeep it for those young people.
Yeah. We were actually at dinner last night after the post position draw talking about this, and how Santa Anita as of late has shown a lot of growth in terms of youth coming out. Ever since the pandemic, Michelle Yu, I was talking to about this, and she just said that they noticed a lot more young people were coming out to the races. I'm like, I wonder what it is. Can we put it on one person, Griffin Johnson, promoting it? No, you can't put it on one person necessarily, but you can't say it's hurting it. He is exposing the sport to people that likely never would have come across it before. I don't have a TikTok. I called it Tic Tac to begin with. That's how old and out of touch I am. But I do believe that if you can showcase this sport to millions of people, and that's how they're consuming information, then what's wrong with that?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's what we're aiming for. And then we can drill down on the specifics later on once we get those people in the door. You know, that's the main thing. I have one more question, and it's just a background question on you, Britney, because you do a phenomenal job on TV. You come from a racing family. At what point did you think you wanted to do broadcasting? Was this something that you wanted to do since you were little, or was it a later in life decision?
I was a terrible actress, so I had to pivot. No, honestly, I grew up from 3 years old wanting to be an actress. I love film and TV. I went to an acting school, trained for a very long time. I went through the whole process of getting an agent, going out on auditions, and it was just a grind. And through that, I realized I just didn't love the process as much as I thought I would. And to be an actor, you have to love it. It is a hard business. During that time, I fell back in love with horse racing. I think I went through my teens of not wanting to hang out with my parents, so I wasn't as involved. My dad started to get better horses, went to the races a lot with him, became friends with those that were at TVG, and they just approached me and said, would you be interested in auditioning for a role? So I didn't have any experience whatsoever in terms of broadcasting, but I knew the sport to a degree, had to learn how to really read past performances and whatnot, because that wasn't something that my dad quizzed me on. And but I felt comfortable in front of the camera. And I think I'm naturally inquisitive. I just really like asking people questions and hearing their story. So this was a way for me to combine kind of all of the things that I really enjoyed.
Right.
Awesome.
Right. And you just mentioned asking questions. I know as the intrepid reporter that you are, did you have a question for Joe that you wanted to ask?
Why just me? Why Joe or John
or me? But if I ask about, do you have any questions for me? Then it sounds like I'm being a real egotistical dick.
Or the both of you. No, I'm actually really curious. It has nothing to do with Sandman, but what was the impetus for you two to start this podcast?
Good, John. You want to tell the story?
Well, we were on a previous podcast, and surprisingly enough, I was a little outspoken and got some pushback from it, and resigned. And unbeknownst to me, the very next day when Joe found out that I resigned, he resigned also, and he was still working for that same employer. So it was a really big thing that he did, and I know I've said it before on the show a bunch of times, but Britney, you'll be hearing it for the first time. That meant so much to me. Because I didn't even think Joe liked me, let alone that he was like, no, I respect the way you do it. So we gave it like 6-8 months, and then we got back in touch with Patty Wolf, our intrepid producer, and said, hey, do you want to do this again? And thankfully, she was at a low point in her career where she was like, yeah, I've won 17 Emmys, but yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll do your rinky dink podcast. And then the rest is kind of history. We've just been having so much fun doing it. And thankfully, people seem to like or want to listen to what we have to say. But it's been a really fun run for, at least for me, I think for Joe also.
Mm-hmm. This is no rinky-dink podcast, by the way. I was checking sound levels.
Really?
That's right.
Okay, good.
And just to expound on that, like John and I we met each other for the first time on air on the old podcast. Like he was a guest that came on, and we had such a good rapport.
It was like show 3, wasn't it? Wasn't like episode 3 or something?
Yeah, it was early, and then so you became a regular co-host, and then like we've been inseparable ever since.
To the point where I actually grew a beard and mustache just so I could be
just
like
to look like me.
Yeah. I will not do that for either of you.
Okay, good. Not with the wedding. Not with the wedding coming up for sure.
I love it though, because you guys are talking about, you're not just talking about fluff, right? And you're asking real questions, and you're also not hiding behind an egg on Twitter. So it's
right.
awesome.
Exactly. Well, Britney, that's actually why, all kidding aside, if you watch the show that we did right after the Pegasus, we compliment you so much on what Joe was asking before about the fact that like everyone else would have just footed it around Belinda and not asked her the hard questions, and you did, and you asked a follow-up question too. So it wasn't just like, okay, I'm going to ask this question and she could kind of deflect and then move on with the interview. You followed up, and for us that meant a lot, because it was like, I'm not taking your bullshit answer. I want to ask you a follow-up question again.
You're asking what was on horse people's minds.
Right.
And
exactly.
And much appreciated.
Much respect for that.
Well, thank you for saying that. It was a situation where there was so much going on in the racing world that maybe the general public, those that would watch NBC, wouldn't really know about. So it was a lot of conversation with myself, my producer, editors of like, we feel that this is really important to cover, despite the fact that those watching may not have the entire scope of the situation, because they don't follow horse racing 24/7, or they don't even follow Florida racing 24/7.
Right.
But it was one of those situations where I felt like it really needed to be addressed. I appreciate you saying that. If I had a 30-minute sit down with somebody, not just saying Bullen, but anybody, you can get into the more nitty gritty questions of anything going on. But when you're only given, a minute, because you have an hour show, you want to make sure you go about it the right way. So I appreciate that. But a lot of credit to my producer and the editorial team for kind of figuring out the best way in which we do that for that type of show.
Yeah, I mean, it was really refreshing because she just wanted to get up there and talk about the party and all the celebrities that were there, and you kind of got in there and got to the heart of the matter that a lot of horse people really wanted to know. So really appreciate that. Really appreciate the time coming on the show. So great chatting with you, and keep up the excellent work. We'll see you in Baltimore, Britney.
Oh, this was so much fun, and I feel like it flew right by. Okay, I just need to know. I mean, what should I expect from Sandman? I didn't get into my reporting right now.
I think, we talked about it a little bit earlier on the show, like Mark Cassie's one of those guys that's not going to run the horse unless he's kicking down the stalls. So I think he's primed for a top effort. Like I said, I hope he's not as far back as he was, but he took us to this race. We're not forcing him in this race. So I think, to me, that's one of the greatest endorsements you can have of a horse if you're betting on them. Mm-hmm. He made us enter.
Yeah, I love that. Cassie quoting the late Alan Jerkins, run them when they're good.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Plus, who doesn't like to say "Enter Sandman"? I mean, that's just immediately makes you think like. Right?
Yeah. James Hetfield actually made the call and said, "Oh, I want to go to the Preakness." That's the real story.
I'm using that. Add it to my report right now.
the good reporter and you brought out the real story.
I know. So.
Well, hopefully we'll see you in the winner's circle, and I promise I'll be a little bit more attentive if that's the case.
Yeah, you forgot. You forgot last time. You won't forget this time.
I know. I'm so embarrassed.
Remember this face.
I almost feel like I have to win just to make up for it.
Exactly.
Thank you guys so much. Such a pleasure.
Thanks, Brittany. We really appreciate it.